All right, good afternoon, all, and welcome to St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum's virtual program. My name is Helen Turner, and I'm the Director of Education and Interpretation for the museum. I'd like to welcome our visitors joining us both on Facebook and on Zoom. Thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate your continued support while we're busy at work building the new museum, which is set to open in late summer of 2022. Today, we'll be joined by our guest speaker, Professor Lara Zwarun, who will present on the battle for truth in Russia's war with Ukraine. This topic and the suffering of the Ukrainian people could not be more top of mind. I would, however, like to ground us, as always, in the mission and vision of our museum and the topics we illuminate through our programming. First, our mission, which seeks to use the history and lessons of the Holocaust to reject hatred, promote understanding, and inspire change, which is at the core of our work. We do this in order to fulfill our vision, which is for visitors, both in person and virtually, to have a transformative experience that fosters empathy and empowers our visitors to take action against bigotry and to remember the lessons of the Holocaust. So we picked this topic to explore today, not only because of its immediate importance as we all watch the suffering of people in Ukraine, but because the topics of misinformation and propaganda are so prevalent in our grappling with the history of the Holocaust. I use the word grappling because Holocaust history is difficult and multi-layered. We grapple with the complex histories and narratives of many countries before, during, and after the Holocaust, and Ukraine is no exception. Recently, we have seen a manipulation of this complex history, as Putin and the Kremlin have invoked Holocaust references and used terminology such as to denazify Ukraine or that a genocide is occurring. This is a bold-faced manipulation and distortion of history. Dr. Sarah Bloomfield, director of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, recently wrote an op-ed on Ukraine in which she notes, Ukraine has more history than it can consume. It has often been a difficult history, marred by external threats such as German Nazism and Soviet communism, and internal threats such as extreme nationalism and anti-Semitism. Understanding and digesting this complicated history, along with the volatile and often violent relationship Ukraine has had with Russia, is a core tenet of understanding not only the power of propaganda, but also the complexities of national and international narratives. Today, to walk us through this important topic is our speaker, Dr. Lara Zwarun. Dr. Zwarun is an associate professor in the Department of Communications and Media at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Her research centers on persuasion in the media, including protection of vulnerable audiences from dangerous messages, and how appeals to positive emotions can increase civic advocacy. Her work is appeared in journals such as Media Psychology, American Journal of Public Health, and Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media. Dr. Zwarun is a first-generation Ukrainian American and spent time in 2015 in Ukraine researching the role of social media in combating Russian disinformation. I'm so delighted to be with the speaker today, having listened to her on the radio and really engaging with her, and you are ready for a wonderful talk. So Dr. Zwarun, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm truly honored to be here as a guest of such a meaningful and reverent museum and the community that surrounds it. And I just wanted to say thank you right at the top to the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum for having me. I'm here to offer a combination of things. I have personal history and personal experiences related to Ukraine. That gives me some fairly unique perspectives. Also in my professional life, I am a professor in the Department of Communication and Media. I'm a scholar of persuasion and media effects. And those two sides of me kind of dovetailed in 2014 and 2015 when this war actually started and Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and inspired me to travel there and do some research on the effects of social media in countering misinformation. So kind of from all of those perspectives, I'll be talking to you about what I think and what I know. I do have an ambitious agenda. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and my connection to what's happening in Ukraine. Then I want to discuss some of the communication strategies and particularly use of social media as it was used in 2015 and also as it is done now, and some changes. Try to situate that all in kind of a larger context. And then finally, because this is a heavy topic, I'm going to try to leave you with a little bit of hope and maybe some tips for moving forward. So I'm going to share my screen. And maximize this. Okay. So I've heard warnings about Russia literally my entire life. My father was born in 1943 in Podvolochysk, which is in Western Ukraine. And at a very young age, he was bundled up by his parents and taken with his older sister and literally fled in the middle of the night as as the Russians came to their door. It was a very difficult place to be at that time because where he lived in Ukraine was sort of the front between the Nazis and the Russians, but it was the Russians who came to kill and on that day. And so they left and they began a long journey that took them across several countries in Europe. And ultimately they ended up in Germany, where they lived in a series of displaced persons camps until 1950, when they were able to sail to America and come through Ellis Island. You see here a picture of my dad when he was a young kid in one of those German displaced persons camps. Obviously, there was no Toys R Us, so the little kids would go out and play and they would find relics of the war. So here he is with a German army soldier helmet on his head, and somebody has fashioned him a little wooden sword, and he's playing a game called Protect the Camp from the Russian army. So if you want to think about the trauma that some of these kids that are fleeing, that are having to leave their father behind, that are being shuttled across countries and borders, it takes its toll. It really does. Also, my brother's wife is a more recent Ukrainian immigrant. She's a US citizen now. She's been here for 13 years. She is in Krakow, Poland as we speak. She had an incredibly heart-pulling, tearful reunion with her parents on Sunday. They live outside of Kiev, and they were in some of the worst areas for the fighting. Even though her brother and his family, which includes a 1 and a 7-year-old daughter, were only about 10 miles away, they were not able to get to each other because of how they had the military formation set up. The brother went west, the parents didn't, and then they finally saw the writing on the wall, made a break for it. There were mines. They literally had to go, get told by the locals a secret path through a forest to avoid the mines and the tanks, but they have made it. They are in Poland, and she's there now trying to see if she can get them to America. So this really hits very close to home for me. And it's not just the distrust and dislike of the Russians and how they have treated Ukrainians for hundreds of years, as well as my father's journey. It's also the part where he spent 7 years in another country that wasn't his permanent home and wasn't his original home. And just that whole feeling of people having their whole lives uprooted. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience that can relate to that either firsthand or from stories that they've been told by family members. My dad is still alive. My dad's sister is still alive, and she lives in a suburb of Cleveland, Parma, that's known as Little Ukraine. And she's sitting, this is her in the picture in the red, and the older gentleman sitting next to her is not a blood relative, but he and his daughter, who is the one whose back is to you in the black, they were in the same camp at one point as my dad's family. And when my dad's family finally made it to America, as soon as they had cobbled enough money together, they sent for and sponsored this other family. So these are the kinds of bonds that are formed in these types of situations. And recognizing that everybody was not getting any younger, a couple years ago, I recruited some friends and we went and just talked and interviewed and looked at pictures and kind of got things down for posterity. I haven't done anything formal with it yet, but I just sleep better at night knowing that I've got it recorded somewhere. And I was just going to play you like a quick 30-second clip of my aunt narrating while she was going through these pictures. And again, I'm sure there's people on this call that can relate to this, but she's telling me who the people are in the pictures and just going through the list of atrocities that have happened. And if she sounds a little too excited or happy about the word Siberia, it's because right before we come in, she had been struggling to remember that word. Okay, so.
And that's Zemko, the one that was killed in the underground army, and that's Nestor that I used to play. We got meningitis and he died in 1941 when Germans came, and that's her husband, uncle, and that's his sister, you know, but that's my father's sister. And she was sent with grandfather to Siberia, yes, to Siberia, and in 2 weeks, they were cutting the trees that he fell down and killed her.
So those are the kind of happy stories you get if you go through my family tree on that side. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about my heritage on the other side. So I am half Ukrainian and half Jewish, but it's not the same half. So my father is Ukrainian. He's actually Ukrainian Catholic, or he was raised Ukrainian Catholic, and my mother is Jewish. If you go back in her family history, she does originate from the same part of the world. I like to joke that like cabbage and klezmer music is where my two worlds combine, but her family had been in the United States for longer. And I bring this up because Helen said at the beginning of the talk, there is always this this narrative that Ukrainians are anti-Semitic or that Ukraine has been anti-Semitic. And that's not my area of expertise. And I definitely think that things have happened that were very shameful to Jews in all parts of the world. But recently I was going through some things of my father's, and I remember when I was a young girl that my parents left for a week when I was in first grade and they went to Denmark. And it turned out that my dad, who was pretty politically active at that time, especially, he went there for something called the International Sakharov hearing. And so this was an international tribunal or hearing to consider the role of how the Soviet Union was doing with all these various exiled people from different groups, political dissidents, religious believers, artists, and whatnot. And as the article says, Soviet Jews figured prominently in this discussion. So my parents flew there, and then subsequently, when my dad got back, he was interviewed for a bunch of newspapers. And we lived in Philadelphia at the time, and I thought this was kind of an interesting little tidbit. This actual publication is the Jewish Exponent, which is the second oldest Jewish publication in the US, I believe, and it's based out of Philadelphia. So they interviewed him. That's what this article is. And he says in the article, in the Soviet Union, to be anything but Russian is to be considered a bourgeois nationalist. And to the Soviet, he talks about how the Jews and the Ukrainians have been pitted against each other by the Soviets, but that hasn't been entirely successful. He says the Ukrainians and Jews have a lot in common. They have a religion and a national spirit. Both are proud of their culture. And of course, the Jews have a 2,000-year jump on us, but we're catching up, he laughs. So he goes on to talk in this article about how important he thinks it is that Ukrainian Jewish relations be fostered and that the groups work together to fight against the political prisoners and the atrocious acts that are still occurring in Russia as far as trying to blight out people's beliefs, cultures, language, religion, and so forth. And at the end here, my dad never wanted to mince words. He says, what should we expect when Soviets are told, since they are knee-high, to lie, cheat, and conquer us? They are told the West is the enemy. The only difference between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany is the language and the climate. So, as somebody who is half Jewish and half Ukrainian, I've always been particularly sensitive to those accusations. I also I just want to make a quick point that I'm also aware of how differently the Ukrainian refugees right now are being treated than refugees from a lot of other countries, particularly ones where people have darker skin. So I think it merits mentioning that there are these kinds of, injustices, but I also think that to the extent that we can kind of unite on one side, it's going to be very helpful when battling an enemy like Putin and Russia. So as a communications person, I know that words matter. And really, I've always known that words matter my whole life. Ooh, sorry, having a little, I knocked my little hair. Come back. My dongle is loose. Okay, so words matter. I've always known this. I'm inherently a communicator, and I just wanted to point out to you how much this is true. Sometimes you'll hear people say Ukraine, sometimes the Ukraine. You may have noticed recently that more people are pronouncing it Kiev and not cave. This is an example of Russification. The first spelling of the city that you see there, that is the Ukrainian language spelling, and the pronunciation of Kiev is how Ukrainians say it. You did not grow up hearing it said that way. You learned about chicken Kiev and you spelled it K-I-E-V. That's Russia refusing to let Ukrainians speak their own language, write in their own language, and literally get hauled off to camps. You can't see my screen. Ooh, okay, hang on. Okay, you see my screen now? Okay, sorry about that, everybody. So words definitely do matter, and you've already been a victim of Russification, whether you realize it or not, because you didn't know the proper name for these countries. It's not the Ukraine, it's Ukraine. And one of the things I did when I traveled to Ukraine in 2015 was I surveyed some average Ukrainian citizens, the ones that I could get to take my survey. And as the quote earlier said, this war had already started. In 2014, Ukraine had the Revolution of Dignity, the Euromaidan, and they ousted their Russian sympathetic, very corrupt president. And not long after that, Russia invaded Crimea and annexed it, and then they invaded Eastern Ukraine, the Donbas region. And then I went there, and so I just asked people, how do you want this described with words? How would you talk about this? Who is fighting this war? Is it a war? And you can see that half of the people called it a war, wanted it to be called a war, and another 35% wanted it to be called an invasion. Less than 10% of the people wanted to call it a conflict, which is what we typically have called it in the years leading up to what's happening now. And a conflict is a lot lesser than a war and invasion. There were also a handful of people who offered other names, and you can see that they were all sort of in the same camp of, hey, let's call what's really going on by its real name. This is Russia invading Ukraine. Similarly, for years now, since this has been happening in the press, you hear people saying pro-Russia separatists, or this story that the people in Eastern Ukraine are really ethnic Russians who don't want to be Ukrainian. They want to go back to their motherland. And when we asked these in the survey, who do you call those people fighting? You can see that only 7% were buying that narrative, and the vast majority all considered them some form of Russians or Russian proxies. So the main reason I went, I did do the survey, but one of the main things that I was really interested in when I went on that trip in 2015 is how the Ukrainians were using social media against this much larger country that had a very active disinformation campaign already going. And there's really like 4 different ways that a country can use the social media in this context. One is to connect with the diaspora. I'm not going to talk about that. That's not really what my research there was about. I will just say that connection was very much how I got motivated to go, because I was basically watching the revolution on my computer late at night and feeling this commonality with other people who had my background. Another way that you can use social media is as state diplomacy. And this is really, for the older people in the audience, this is really a stark difference from how state diplomacy used to work. And when I went in 2015, I was asking a lot of people, what are you doing to kind of proactively promote Ukraine's image? Do you realize that most people don't know about Ukraine? They haven't heard of Ukraine. They don't have any thoughts about it, positive or negative. How are you getting your name out there? And at the time, they really weren't. They had just had a revolution and kicked out their leader, and they were in the middle of fighting an underfunded at that time war, and they just didn't have the resources to do it. Now, you probably all recognize the gentleman in the picture, President Zelensky. He has really emerged as almost like a social media star. He has really embraced this winning the hearts and minds using social media technique in a way that Ukraine just was not ready for in 2015. He's had some really powerful sound bites. I think one of the best ones was when he talked about how can you say never again for 80 years, and then when it happens again, you don't do anything. Obviously, he was talking to Congress this morning virtually and having some very powerful words. So I'm proud that Ukraine has evolved in this way. It's very bewildering. This was not what diplomacy used to look like. Diplomacy was behind closed doors. It was slow. And things have really changed even since 2015. Not long after that, there was a series of tweets exchanged between the official Ukraine Twitter account and the official Russia Twitter account. And they were arguing back and forth about their history. And they actually used a GIF from The Simpsons. And Twitter went crazy because all the young people on Twitter were like, oh my God, Ukraine just burnt the Russians, with this reference to The Simpsons. And when I used to tell that story, it was like, wow, that's crazy. And now it's just sort of like, oh yeah, all politicians are using social media in this way. So that really represents an evolution. A third way that you can use social media is on the ground. Now, I know the big one we're here to talk about is number 4, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But if I could just stay at number 3, this was the one that I wasn't expecting. So everywhere I went, as I was asking my questions about state diplomacy and counter disinformation, people just kept showing me all the ways that they were showing up for their army, the volunteer movement, and not just being volunteers, but volunteers as part of a civic society. They weren't volunteering for a cause or a museum. They were volunteering to keep their country moving in the direction of democratic, free values that they believed in. And so these are just some various examples from my trip that I want to go through quickly. You may have seen this on Anderson Cooper on the right. They have these like looms set up in different parks, and anybody who just has a few spare moments can help weave camouflage that will hide the tanks and the armors, the soldiers. On the left, you see Grandma Lita, 89 years old, survived the Nazi occupation, humbly presenting fruit from her garden and her orchard to one of the volunteer groups so they can use it to make jam and energy bars for the soldiers. And then, of course, the use of social media to highlight this and to encourage others to do the same thing. So there's more camouflage in this picture on the top. This was a group that I stumbled upon, entirely volunteers, all had full-time jobs. And what's in those Ziploc bags in the middle are dried vegetables. So they sell crafts, which you can see on the bottom of the table there, little trinkets that they can make to raise money. They bought themselves a food dehydrator, and they get donations like from Grandma Lita or from the grocery store. And that's essentially like borscht in a bag, just add water, because the soldiers are out there. It's very cold in the winter and they don't know how well balanced their meal is. So they just literally will pile up somebody's car with the most recent batch of dehydrated vegetables and camouflage and whatever else they've managed to get, and would drive it to the front line. This was a sign in a restaurant when I was there, letting people know, and they did have it in English and in Ukrainian, that 1 hryvnia, like $1 from every purchase, is going to automatically be donated to the military operation. Now, the military, they still need donations. They're much more funded now. This was at the very beginning of the conflict when nobody had really sent them aid. I don't have time to go into all of it with World Bank loans and everything, but it was a very volunteer effort. and all people were supporting it. I had a chance to visit some soldiers who were back from the front line. The reason I showed this picture, I don't know why this stuck out to me as the most salient detail, but one of the things I couldn't get over when I went to that hospital, this is like a VA hospital, is how all the sheets were totally different. If you think about an American hospital, you picture all the bedding being uniform. And if you see on the right here, that's actually just a supply closet where volunteers drop off things for the wounded. So you're going to get whatever sheets were dropped off. You're going to get whatever bar of soap was dropped off. Again, the structure of the hospital was there, but ordinary citizens taking it upon themselves to enhance and add more and bring blankets or sheets or whatever it was that they could spare. So what I got from all of this, like I said, was just how committed to being active civic people Ukrainians are, but also how well they mobilized and they organized. And it really does not surprise me that things, I don't want to say are going well, but that they're surviving as well as they are in this war, because they really are all in it together. So now back to what you came here for. The final big piece of how you can use social media for countering disinformation. What I have pictured here is a website called StopFakeorg. And this is an organization that debunks misinformation, largely Russian disinformation about Ukraine, but they do some about other parts of Europe. And when I found out about this organization, I was so fascinated by it because it was started by a bunch of college students who were in the Department of Journalism at a university in Kiev. And I teach in a college university department of communications scholars. And I was just like, oh my God, I cannot believe that this is just students doing this. And I interviewed one of the founders of the organization. They have since grown and gotten much more established. And it's remarkable what they do. And a lot of it is not even really that fancy. I mean, a lot of times you can just like Google photo search and find that pictures are not from where they say they're from, or there are clues in the picture somewhere that it's the wrong year or the wrong place. But they just keep this running blog of all the things that you can debunk. And I have some resources that I will have sent out afterwards if you're interested, and you can get on this website if you want to. You can have it translated into English. But it's a really amazing website. It's a really amazing effort, but it's also reactive. It's not proactive. So they're waiting for the lie, and then they're going, it's not really a lie. It's not really true. And what I am seeing more of now is, in addition to this, is a lot more proactive counter disinformation. So for example, just in the last couple of weeks since the invasion has happened, a group of public relations professionals from Ukraine, largely women, can't go to work. You know, their offices are being bombed. It's not safe in the streets. Operations are halted. And they banded together and they formed sort of like this press pool. And so they have a website. And if you go online as a Western journalist and fill out a form, they will send you accurate updates about the war and what's going on the ground in Ukraine, as an effort to more proactively get the right information out there. So instead of just debunking what's already been said, they're trying to give people sources. And I just think that's so cool that they are, you know, not able to do their regular jobs, but they've managed to get organized and pool their talents and their connections. They're all over the country, and they're really making a difference in that way. Another proactive thing that Ukraine is doing is maintaining a website. You've probably heard about this, where captured and killed Russian soldiers can be shown, and people in Russia can hopefully get on the website and track where their family members that are in the army are, because many of them have not been told anything, or have not been told anything truthful, and they don't know where people are, if they're alive, if they're dead. That's another powerful proactive use of social media. The other thing that's happening is that the technology is evolving. Computer skills, being able to debunk information because you can tell where the IP address originated from, or you can tell if somebody is the same person as used to be under a different name on a social media channel. All of that is getting a lot better. So there's another website that I think is absolutely brilliant. we know that Russians are not, the average Russians are getting cut off increasingly from media. They don't have social media. They don't have free press. They don't think that there's really a war going on. And the Anonymous, who you may have heard of, the group Anonymous, which are kind of like these, this like hacker collective, they have really taken upon themselves to help Ukraine. And they've created this website called 1920, the year 1920.in. And if you go to that website, you can actually, and I don't know how they do it, I'm not that tech savvy, but they will basically manage to get your text message to a Russian phone. A random Russian person who has a mobile phone will suddenly get a text, and it's what you send. And they have like pre-written messages in Russian, or you can, you know, add your own. And they're just basically trying to like disrupt these people and go, hey, there really is like a whole world out here and you're totally being lied to. We probably all saw the woman on the Russian news channels jump up with a sign and try to say the same thing. So especially if you're young, if you're tech savvy, if you have kids on TikTok, spread that 1920.in, and they're sending like millions of random texts to Russians just going, hey, wake up, this is a war, people are dying. So those are some of the ways that that things have kind of evolved in since the last time I was there. Another big one I want to talk about are troll farms. So trolls used to be things from fairy tales that lived under a bridge. Now they refer to very organized, well-paid operations that are systematically pumping false information into all sorts of channels. Also on that list of resources, I included an article, and I took the time to go back and find the one that I remembered, and I wanted to find one that was from before 2016, because everybody talked about the trolls and how the Russians got on social media and affected the 2016 presidential election. But I wanted to show what was going on ahead of time and before that, excuse me. And there's actually like a podcast of it. You can listen to it, you can read it, but it's an amazing story of this journalist who went and actually flew to Russia and tried to get people to talk to him. And Anonymous had hacked into some of the there's a big troll farm Internet Research Agency, IRA, and Anonymous had hacked into some of their files and released the email addresses of a lot of their employees and former employees. So he tried to track down people and get them to talk to him. And needless to say, they were very reluctant to do that. And only a couple of them would, and I don't want to ruin the story, you really should go listen to it, but basically one of the ones that agrees to talk to him sets him up so that he becomes the victim of trolling, and his reputation is smeared before he can even get back to the States and publish the story that that he's going to publish. But so these are literal jobs, they have shifts, they have departments. People will be given lists of, this is the talking point today. Here's an alphabetical listing of all these towns. You go to the town that starts with an A, you find whatever little board is popular, their local newspaper, whatever they're discussing online. And this is the idea that you hammer home every single day. And it's not always just like pro-Russia or anti-Ukraine. They frequently, part of it is to change the narrative, but part of it is also to just create chaos and make us not trust anything, which they've done a very good job of. So there's increasing evidence that they've infiltrated like Black Lives Matters groups and posed as African Americans and tried to rile up controversy there. There's very recent headline out there about just an inordinate percentage of American Christian websites that are actually being run by Russian bots. So they have a quota. These workers have a quota. It's a very attractive job because it pays a lot more than anything else. And this is something that their government is budgeting for, and that they have been increasingly successful in debunking, or excuse me, in getting out there. Got ahead of myself there. How can the Russians believe that? Well, it's not just that like they're not hearing the same version that we are. They're completely cut off from reality. It's their whole world is different. And that's why I think that it's so important that all the businesses are closing down in Russia. Yes, because of the economic effects, but also because when your IKEA closes, when your McDonald's closes, when your Starbucks closes, that challenges the narrative that you guys are the heroes and that, you know, you're fighting on the side of the good. Why are all those companies leaving? So one thing that I wanted to show you, and I hope I'm not being overly ambitious. Let's see. Did my screen move or did it stay the same? Can you see the IMGR website or no?
No,
Or still see the troll?
Dr.
Still see
Zwarun, we are currently still looking at the troll.
Okay, thank you. So let me quickly fix that. Stop my share. And now I'm going to reshare. And now, do you see into the rabbit hole of right-wing insanity? Are you still looking at the troll? Yeah, okay, good. So this is a social media website called IMGR. I don't know what this is on the side, so I want to close that. But this just came up like in the last day or two, where this person named Ben Collins, this was yesterday, has figured out that there's now a new narrative being sent out through the trolls, which is that Ukraine has 30 biolabs where they're manufacturing biological weapons, and that is why Russia is attacking them. And what's interesting is he points out that, first of all, Putin gave a very long speech when he began the invasion, and he talked about Nazification and denazifying. He never said anything about biolabs. So this is totally after the fact as a justification, because the Nazi story isn't working so well, and Zelensky is such a hit, and people know that he is Jewish and that he was democratically elected. So this is what I wanted to show you. This is the kind of data that people can get now. This is a company that tracks how often things are mentioned on social networks, and they looked at far-right social networks in the States, and this is how often the phrase biolabs was mentioned. And you can see that it was virtually never mentioned, and then suddenly it goes crazy. And if you look at the date at the bottom, that is the exact date that the invasion started. So this is the new trend. And he talks about how he does some research to figure out who started it. And he finds this old post, and it's by somebody whose Twitter handle is War Clandestine, but because he has these technology skills, he's able to go back and see that that was actually somebody who was a major figure in QAnon that had been shut down and has now reappeared with this new handle. And in fact, that person, when they were on QAnon, the original handle, was one of the people who published actual maps of the US Capitol, so that when the people went and took it on January 6th and invaded it, they would know exactly where the best places to confront people were. And so since then, he says he had 3 comments, and 8 days later, now this is everywhere. And this kind of cracks me up, even though it's not funny. He says, you know, that pro-Trump and QAnon people were uneasy rooting against Putin. You know, you see the big bloody babies, it's horrible. But now the biolabs narrative allows them to refocus on their major enemies, the Bidens and Anthony Fauci. So now we've got Jeffrey Epstein, Fauci, Biden, it all comes back, and Ukraine is the bad guy. You've got Tucker Carlson repeating this. And that brings me to another point, which is you have to understand how the media environment works. Media in our country is for profit, even though they are selling a good information that it behooves us to have be accurate and be objective. And the more things get watched, sent, spread, clicked on, the higher they pop up in the search results, the more likely they are to be on your social media feeds. So we're creating this this cycle of taking misinformation and actually prioritizing it over things that maybe aren't as clickbaity, right? Because they want to get advertisers. That's where they get their dollars from, whether you're a news outlet or a blog or a newspaper, a website. You need eyeballs to sell advertising. And so that's why we always have these clickbait headlines and these kind of misleading, sensational, teasy things that get us to click. They don't care that the information is inaccurate. They just want the eyeballs because that's how they make money. So it's now become a new narrative, if you don't buy the neo-Nazi story, that we're actually needing to disarm Ukraine because they have labs creating biological weapons that are supported by the United States, which hopefully I don't have to tell you is not true. So let me stop my share and then restart my share with my PowerPoint. Yeah, I got the troll back. All right, good. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. So you can see that this is, when they say it's a hybrid war, it really is a war. This is just going on at so many levels, and there's so many players, and it sets the stage for where we're at now, where people don't trust politicians, they don't trust the media, they don't trust what they believe, where something like COVID can become a partisan issue, and you have people that will swear it's not real, and people who say clearly the science shows that it is real. We have to wake up. We have to recognize that after this war going on for 8 years, and people saying, oh, it's a conflict, and they're pro-Russia separatists, and letting all these things happen and not putting our foot down, now we're in this very ugly situation that we're in now. So the military war is really, crucial right now. That's what's killing people. But to some extent, we're complicit a little bit in the other side of the hybrid war if we don't start to be more alert to how our media habits, and I don't mean to say that this is people's fault in any kind of an intentional way. I get it. You're busy. You have too much information floating around. You're multitasking. You have this computer that lives in your pocket that is constantly pinging and telling you new things. And it's hard to be conscientious in your consumption, but they are exploiting that reality because we are easy to believe things, and we don't want to do the work to see if things are disprovable. So I said at the beginning that, oops, why did that happen? Oh, because I'm on the troll. Okay, hang on. Okay. Are you seeing my screen still, my PowerPoint? Okay, cool. Okay, so I said that I was going to try to end and be a little bit hopeful, and to try to give people some actual tips of what they can do or advice. This was something I saw on a friend's social media feed recently, and that is actually a picture of people fleeing Ukraine just a few days ago, but they made the photo black and white to prove the point of how similar it looks to the Holocaust and when the Jews were fleeing in or being sent by train somewhere they didn't want to go. And I think it bears repeating that like Zelensky said, we really can't ever let people forget. And that really means that we need to be relentless and keep hammering that home. 80 years is about 3 generations. And it seems like now it's not as well understood or as well remembered or as well respected. And the Holocaust and the horrible things that happened and the atrocities of World War II. And so it really is, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, it is incumbent on all of us to always keep these memories and these realities and these stories alive. And obviously I'm here on behalf of an institution that's doing exactly that. Now that's sort of a vague statement, never forget, that doesn't really tell you what to do. So I would like to give you some pointers of what to do. Like I said before, people are busy, they're distracted. Getting things out in less newsy forms, not that the news isn't important, but talking to people, meeting them where they're at. For example, Leonardo DiCaprio, turns out his maternal grandmother was Ukrainian. He just donated $10 million. That news spread like wildfire. People who aren't interested in hearing about geopolitics are interested in hearing about Leonardo DiCaprio. So not exclusively delivering messages via pop culture, but being aware that that's part of the arena that all this diplomacy and geopolitics happens in now. It's a big change in thinking for people who are not young. As I said earlier, you have to control the narrative. If you're just reactive, it's probably too late. There's a very interesting study that has been done on a concept called pre-bunking. So we talk about debunking something, proving it's untrue after the fact. This is pre-bunking it. And we've seen Biden and his cabinet do this a lot already, particularly in the very early days when we weren't sure if Russia was going to invade, where they basically say, this is what Russia is going to do. And they try to kind of take some of the wind out of their sails. They are going to say that Ukraine provoked them and that's why they had to attack. They are going to accuse Ukraine of having biological weapons, and that's going to be then when they come in and use biological weapons, which I sure hope is not true. But Putin is a lot like an abusive spouse. Whatever he is accusing you of, a lot of times is what he's going to do next. We've seen what he did in Chechnya. We've seen what he supported in Syria. So I really hope that biological warfare is not anywhere on the agenda. Seeking ways to engage young people. Again, I teach college students. A lot of them just don't really know a whole lot about basic civics. I don't mean to put them down. It's very easy to be tempted by other easier, more pleasant sources of information. You know, the world seems messed up. You follow your sports, you follow your celebrities, you spend time with your friends on social media, but individually, this is something that you can really do. Find way, you know, geopolitics, history, it's not just facts and dates and wars. It's music, it's culture, it's art, it's dance. Is there a way that you can help young people coming up in our society to recognize the power of our civic duty and to see the connections across borders to the humanity in different cultures and different countries? So that's sort of a call to action that I'd like to put out there as a challenge for people. Obviously, the hearts and minds piece matters. Russian warship, F off, you know, that probably got Ukraine at least as much credibility as anything formal presented in a political capacity. But we are a democracy. We are what Ukraine is fighting for. This is the setup that they are dying to have. It's up to us to use it. And there's absolutely evidence that this is mattering. A lot of the Congress people are saying to Biden, we have been home in our home states and our home cities, and people are not happy. They want us to do more. And they were pushing that message on to the federal government. And so knowing who your senators are, knowing who your representatives are, getting involved is very important. I probably don't have to tell this audience that because they're here today, but some people definitely need to hear it. This is a phrase I would love if you took away from this talk: slow down the share. What that means is we love to have the scoop. And this is true for the people that are creating media for profit and trying to get people to follow their clickbait, but it's also true for us as regular people. Ever notice how when a celebrity dies, everybody races to be the first one to say RIP so-and-so? It's not necessarily that they were a huge fan of that person. It's that they want to be the one that broke the news to their immediate circle of people. They knew first. We love that. And now that you're aware that the media industry is rewarding shares and it's rewarding clicks and it's sort of self-perpetuating in that way, you really do have to encourage yourself to slow down and make sure that what you're forwarding is something that you've actually looked at and that you've kind of sussed for whether it's reliable or not. I know that's not fun. I know it takes time that we don't always have, but we're starting to see the social networks catch up with this a little bit. They didn't do much for a long time. And that's what I mean by supporting efforts to get the cat back in the bag. Cat's not going all the way back in the bag. I mean, this technology is here. I know that. But for example, on Twitter now, if you go to retweet something that has an actual article attached to it and you haven't opened the article, it will prompt you and say, are you sure you don't want to read this article before you retweet it? And I think that's like a really good example of something social media can do. Law is always behind technology. It's always struggling to catch up. But I think I understand we have free speech, believe me, but there has to be some governing because we're falling on our sword here. We're just allowing people to manipulate us, and the stakes could not be higher right now. Standing up for truth in your circle, having the uncomfortable discussions, making the response when somebody says something that's inaccurate or that you don't believe in. I know it could be uncomfortable and you might think, oh, but I've known her forever, or we're playing cards, it's not the time. But you can make a difference gently by correcting things or challenging things. And then supporting independent journalism. This could be St. Louis Public Radio here in town, ProPublica. There's a ton of different groups that you could support, but the people that aren't doing it for profit, as the BBC, look at how much more news the BBC actually shows, international news, in their broadcast than what we have on our news, where we talk about, fundraisers and Schnucks is releasing a new flavor of something, and it's basically all public relations. So as you're donating to other causes, don't forget about the journalists. Some of them are even dying over there. I'm almost done here and ready for questions. I just wanted to end on one last slide. I am a Ukrainian American. I don't feel like I can miss this opportunity to say what I wish she would do. So this is just me speaking on behalf of me. It's a very difficult position to be in because I don't like war. I am so appalled by the atrocities that I'm seeing, and ratcheting it up and calling for weapons and calling for arms seems to go against that. And I found somebody's tweet, that's what's on the right-hand screen here, and he was kind of musing through the same thing that I'm talking about, basically saying, the Ukrainians are doing it for themselves. As he says, they're punching well above their weight class, but they are outgunned, they are outnumbered. And the biggest thing, like Zelensky said this morning, is we have to close the skies over Ukraine for one simple reason. That's how they're killing all the innocent people. And that's how they're destroying the city. And as Putin realizes this is not going to be an easy victory, and it might not even be a victory, he's just determined to destroy the country and the people as much as he can. And so I understand, again, I'm not a geopolitical expert, this isn't my area, but I understand people's concerns that if we quote unquote close the sky and Russian planes and missiles fly over Ukraine and NATO takes them out, that may be the beginning of something bigger. I'm not sure that's true. I think Putin's playing a bluffing game, but I do understand people's hesitation about that. Ukraine is willing to protect their own sky. They just need the right materials, the right weapons, the right planes. It gets all complicated because they only know how to use certain weapon systems. You can't just push a button and know how to fly a certain kind of plane. And there's been a lot of back and forth. And I feel like the government has really equivocated and done it in a really poorly communicated way, things coming out and then getting retracted, because Putin knows everything that they're saying. So anyway, I encourage you to continue to donate. I think eventually we're going to see some refugees arriving here in St. Louis. International Institute is always great at supporting them. Absolutely, there's very few companies left in Russia still doing business, but Papa John's is, Subway is. We've probably heard about the guy from Yale that has the list that's updated every hour of who remains in Russia. Get on social media, tell your friends, do not go eat Papa John's tonight because they have blood on their hands, they really do. Stay active, and let's just all hope that there is a lot less death and a lot more peace and a lot more democracy in the future. Thank you, and I will end my screen there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Zwarun. What an incredible presentation. You've given us tremendous food for thought. Tremendous. I particularly wanted to pay attention to how you brought us back to sort of never forget or never again, with that image at the train station, and just how powerful it is when we see today represented in black and white. And even though, we know very obviously that this is not a genocide or anything like the Holocaust occurring at the moment, we do see, the displacement, the suffering of war. We've all seen the images of women, children, men, people who are losing their lives in this conflict. And I really appreciate you bringing us back to that and what's the human lives that are at stake. So we have about 6 minutes left before the end of our program. So I'm going to take us to one of our first questions, which I think you kind of got to, but I was wondering if you could take us in a little deeper. This question comes from our audience. It was pre-submitted. It says, why is the Russian populace still so willing to believe official government reports from Putin and media agencies. Very few seem to be questioning that propaganda. So that was our question from the audience, but my first question would be, do you agree with this premise? Or do you feel that Russians are trying to combat this propaganda?
I mostly agree with that premise. I think it's hard for us to understand. In this country, we hear alternate truths or alternate versions, but we're also hearing the original version, and we're also hearing people arguing about which side is right. They're not hearing any of that. They are only getting one version of the story. And I think it's hard, if you don't live in it, to conceptualize how absolute that is. Also, it's kind of like a house of cards. If what your government has been telling you all your life in every capacity is not true, that's not just a matter of going, oh, I guess we are bombing Ukraine and they said that we weren't. That's like your whole existence, your whole reality. What else isn't true? And I think that that's probably just incredibly scary for people to recognize that literally everything that they thought was black might be white. And so, I mean, I think the main reason they aren't getting it is because they are being cut off from it. But the social media hadn't been as blocked until when this invasion started. There were still a lot of people that were active on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and that's getting harder and harder to do in Russia. So I think it's also a function of age. You know, the people that are younger and are more active on social media, or were more active on social media, have more of that exposure to the international point of view, and the older generation is probably more entrenched in believing it and less able to be exposed to those messages. That's why I love that little thing about the text messages. I mean, I don't know what I would think if I got a random text message from someone that I didn't know going, you know, guess what, you're in the Matrix, but but maybe it'll help.
And that actually led perfectly into another question we had, which was about the split of the generations, and how the older generations seem more entrenched in the propaganda, whereas younger generations of Russians are more able to question because of their access to technology. So that was another question that we had. A question that we also had that was pre-submitted was that in a recent NPR interview, you mentioned the idea of a hybrid war. Can you please explain this term and give any insight into the implications of what this means for modern warfare?
Sure. So the hybrid war refers to the fact that you're fighting on the ground and you're fighting in communication and social media for people's minds. I mean, the idea of propaganda goes back well into the previous century, but now it's just different. It's not that heavy-handed, have a victory garden kind of awkward, very intentional, obvious effort. It's much more insidious. And I have two kids that are teenagers. They love social media. They love TikTok. And they're very impressed by like how many followers somebody has. And really more and more, and this kind of speaks to the generation question too, the new expert in our society is somebody who can get a lot of followers and a lot of likes. I would say someone who's popular, but popular implies some sort of an interpersonal relationship. It's just really how many people you can get to click and follow you. And so we've gone from this idea of an expert being somebody who knows a lot and is competent in the topic to an expert being somebody who is a social influencer. And I think that is really, really dangerous. So the hybrid war is getting the social influencers on your side or using them to get your word out, and recognizing that even if that doesn't seem like the way it should be, if you don't do that, then the other side is going to control the narrative. And, Russia really caught us sleeping on this one.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Zwarun, I'm so sorry. That is where we're going to leave this conversation today. I so appreciate your thoughts and your remarks, and thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I did want to end, very much kind of as you did, with sort of practical actions that you can take today. So I'm actually going to share my screen again. Here we go. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to efforts by Jewish Federation in order to raise funds to help folks in the Ukraine. And I've also put that information in the chat. So I shall click the link for us. And there we go. So in closing with our program today, I did want to draw our attention very quickly to other events that we do have coming up through the museum. So as you can see, March 27th, we have our film series, Walking with the Enemy, which is presented by the wonderful Amy Lutz, who's on with us today. She's the woman making it all work in the background. This should be a wonderful program. It is going to be a hybrid film series, so both online and in person. We're also doing a program with Chesterfield's World War II heroes on April 7th in person. We have the 120th anniversary of Jewish Federation here at Jewish Federation in person on April 10th. And we will have our virtual Yom HaShoah program at 7 p.m. on April 27th. So I do want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you for spending your time, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.